While we're waiting for a lot of our gardening friends to thaw out, I thought if we could take a few minutes and go over a few technical gardening terms. Now, I'm sure you all have heard open pollinator, hybrid, perennial. Well, what exactly do those things mean? Hi, I'm Sonia with Suburban Gardening, and I thought we could just take a few minutes to do a little overview of some of these garden terms that maybe you've heard a lot of times, but you're not quite sure what they mean. Have you ever heard open pollinator, hybrid, GMO even? Well, let's do an overview because I don't want to get into the weeds too much and we don't want to get too technical. But it'd be nice if we could all know what these terms mean because I truly think it helps us know how to plant these plants in our garden and what to expect from them. So I think that's really important. Now, no worries. At the end of this video, I'm going to put up bullet points of all the different terminology that we use. So you can do a screenshot or write it down or whatever you want to do at the end of the video. Let's go ahead and start with perennials because perennials are all over our gardens. When you go to the nursery, perennials are everywhere. And a couple really good examples of perennials would be echinacea. Milkweed is a perennial in my garden. Lupine is definitely a perennial in my garden. Columbine and some foxglove. These are all perennials. And what the perennials do is they come up in the spring. A lot of times we germinate them in the spring. And they come up and they grow beautifully and they last generally through this springtime, the summer, and in my zone 10, even into the fall. And then they die down. And a lot of times it looks like they've disappeared and the plants are just gone. But when the spring comes back around, they come right back to life. And a lot of times the plant is stronger and actually larger than when you saw it last summer or last fall. Annuals are another wonderful plant that we have in our garden. And I know when the springtime comes, we all race out to the nursery and buy some annuals. Right here next to me, I have a beautiful impatient plant. I don't know if you can see it. I actually grow impatiens from seeds and they're wonderful in my garden. So they're considered an annual. These pansies right here also considered an annual, and these have wonderful colors. So not only are pansies annuals, but they're also hybrids. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But these snapdragons that I have next to me, those are annuals, some more snapdragons. A lot of the plants that we have that have a lot of color, like petunias, they're all annuals. And what an annual is basically you germinate it in the spring. It grows vigorously all through the spring and shoots out its flowers, usually within less than 2 months. And then it's just beautiful and looks lovely all through the summer. And mine actually last into the fall. But then they all die down and they're spent. They're completely done. They do not come back in the spring. An annual is just for one season. Now there's also something called a biannual. I don't run into those very often, but a biannual would be you germinate it in the spring. It doesn't grow as vigorously as an annual would, but it doesn't bloom that first year. It blooms the next year. And then once it's finished blooming, it puts out its seeds and then it dies back and the plant is finished. So one type of plant that I love, love, love in my garden is a hybrid. And I'm afraid sometimes a hybrid gets a bad name, but they're really quite wonderful plants. These impatiens, these pansies, these snapdragons all around me are hybrids. And what a hybrid is simply a plant that in a greenhouse somewhere, a very smart person cross-pollinated some plants. And when that happens, what they're trying to accomplish is more color variety, a stronger plant, and maybe even resistance to diseases like mildew or resistance to some type of bugs. So hybrids are really quite a wonderful plant. Now, the only drawback from a hybrid is that the seeds are not reliable. So if you like to collect seeds from your flowers after they've been spent and they start putting out their seeds, you cannot rely on a hybrid seed. And that's why it's really important to know. So hybrids are wonderful plants and we've all purchased them and you might not even know you were buying a hybrid. Heirloom plants are also one of my all-time favorites. Now, basically, to remember what an heirloom plant is, just remember these are the seeds that Grandma used to grow. These are tried and true. They've been around for years and years and years, and they always perform exactly the same every single year. I grow an heirloom cucumber every year. It's perfect in my garden. It always performs, and I get tons and tons of cucumbers. So, other heirloom plants would be a lot of your vegetables like tomatoes, pumpkins, cucumbers. Also, echinacea can be an heirloom plant. A lot of herbs, they're not particularly called heirlooms, but they are. They've been around a long time and they have not been manipulated like a hybrid. So I like to have, for instance, my heirloom echinacea because I like to make tea with my echinacea plant. And that way I know I'm getting exactly what I think I'm getting. And not a hybrid, but an heirloom that's been around for a very, very long time. Now I have a bunch of seed packets here, and right here on the very front, it says heirloom tomatoes. So I know that this tomato has been around a long time, and there's no guessing on how this is going to perform. It's been doing it for years and years and years. And the great thing about an heirloom seed or an heirloom plant is that you can collect those seeds and keep them until spring. And when you plant them, you're going to end up with exactly the same plant that you had last year. So heirloom plants, truly one of my favorites, and I love to collect seeds. One type of plant that I know you've heard of is called GMO. And basically that's genetically modified organism. And what they do with those is they take plants, animals, some kind of DNA into a laboratory and they completely manipulate that organism. But don't worry about GMOs in your garden. It is illegal in the United States to sell GMO seeds. They're not allowed to do that. Genetically modified seeds are only for commercial growers. And so we don't have to worry that they might be out there on our retail shelf. No problems there. Have you ever heard the term OP? Just OP? Well, basically what that means is open pollinator. And you might see OP on a seed packet. You might see it on an identification for a plant. But basically that just means open pollinator. And almost every plant in your garden is an open pollinated plant. The bees and the butterflies come along and they get pollen on their little feet and they jump to the next flower and they're not really caring what plant they land on. They just want to get that pollen. So open pollinated plants, when I think of open pollinated, I think of big fields full of flowers and the little bees jumping all around. And it happens in your garden every day. The only reason open pollinated would be a problem is if you are hybriding a plant and you want to make sure it stays a certain way. So if you're going to hybrid, you have to put it in a greenhouse or somewhere where it's away from all those cute little pollinators that are jumping all over the place. So basically open pollinating, you have them all over your garden. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention was about herbs. And herbs are a wonderful class of plants. I have them all over my garden. And basically, you can think of an herb as a leafy plant that we use in the culinary arts to make food savory. You can use them for potpourri if you want to, have that wonderful aroma. You can also use herbs for medicinal purposes. Now, I'm back to echinacea again, but when I have a cold, I like to drink echinacea tea. It just makes me feel better. Or if I have the cold or a flu, I like to make chicken noodle soup and put sage in my soup. Fresh sage, because sage I think has a antihistamine type of a property to it. So when you think about herbs, you can think about parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Those are all herbs. And basically, they're leafy plants that you can eat. They're good for aroma like lavender. Lavender is a wonderful scent, and they say that it's a calming scent. So those are your herbs, and I highly recommend that you put as many herbs out in your garden as possible. Now, I promised you bullet points, so I'm going to read them off my paper because that way I won't ramble on. Okay, perennials, flowering plants that die down in the winter and they come back in the spring. They reappear in the spring. Biennials, flowers, plants that flower the second year, they die back, and that's the end of them. An annual is only for one season. It grows in the spring, puts out its seeds in the summer, and then it's done and it won't come back again. An heirloom plant you can just think of as grandma's seeds, tried and true year after year. Hybrids are not the original plant. They are cross-pollinated to produce multiple colors, stronger plants, and disease resistance. A GMO is a genetically modified organism where they switch up the DNA on those plants in a laboratory. And an open pollinator are most plants, and I like to think of open pollinators as wildflowers. Herbs we use in the culinary arts for savory and aromatic properties. They're generally leafy plants used for flavoring, garnishes, medicinal purposes, and fragrances. Well, you guys, that was so much fun. I love learning different things about plants. And when it's a little too cold outside, this is kind of the thing that I do. I really hope you found that beneficial. Well, that's all I have for you today. So thanks so much for stopping by. I'll see you guys next time.